You watch a tutorial. You take notes. You understand everything while it's happening. Then you close the tab, and 10 minutes later, it's gone. Not all of it, but enough that you can't actually use what you just learned. You try to remember the steps. You try to recall the logic. But all you're left with is a vague sense that you saw this before. It's frustrating. It feels like wasting time. And at some point, you start to think, maybe you're just not smart enough to retain things. But that's not what's happening. Your brain isn't failing you. It's just being selective about what it keeps. Most people assume memory works like recording. You experience something, and your brain saves it. The more attention you pay, the stronger the recording. If you forget, it means you didn't focus hard enough or care enough. But memory doesn't work that way. It's not about recording, it's about encoding. And encoding only happens when your brain decides something is worth keeping. Your brain is constantly flooded with information. Every conversation, every screen, every sound and movement around you. If it stored all of that, you'd be overwhelmed. So it filters aggressively. Research shows that your brain doesn't save everything you pay attention to. It saves what it thinks you'll need later. And it makes that decision based on context, emotion, and repetition. If something feels important in the moment, but your brain doesn't see you using it, it gets discarded. Not because you didn't try, but because your brain is optimizing for survival, not for learning. Here's what that looks like in real life. You're watching a video on how to use a software feature. You follow along. You pause. You even rewind to make sure you got it. Everything makes sense. But you're not actually using the software while you watch. You're just watching. So your brain treats this like passive observation, not active learning. When you close the video and try to do it yourself, the information isn't there, not because you weren't paying attention, but because your brain never moved it from short-term awareness into long-term memory. The same thing happens when you read an article and then can't summarize it 5 minutes later. Or when someone explains something to you and you nod along, but the next day you couldn't repeat it if your life depended on it. Your brain was there. It heard the words. It processed a meaning. But it didn't encode it as something you needed to keep. And here's the part that makes it worse. The more information you consume in a short period of time, the less your brain can distinguish what matters. If you watch 3 tutorials back to back, your brain doesn't store 3 separate lessons. It blurs them together into one vague memory of learning something. This is why cramming doesn't work. You can absorb a lot of information quickly. You can even recall it during a test if the test happens soon enough. But a week later, it's gone, because your brain never treated it as worth keeping long term. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. The way you're expected to learn in the modern world is completely mismatched with how your brain actually encodes memory. You're told to consume content, watch videos, read articles, take courses. The assumption is that exposure equals learning, but exposure without application is just noise. Your brain doesn't care how much you watched or how well you understood it in the moment. It cares whether you used it, whether you struggled with it, whether you needed it to solve a real problem. That's what triggers encoding, not passive consumption, but active retrieval. When you try to remember something and fail, then look it up and try again. That failure is what tells your brain this information matters. When you use what you learn to build something or fix something or explain something to someone else, that's when it moves from temporary to permanent. But most of the time, you don't get that chance. You learn something, then move on to the next thing. And your brain, doing exactly what it's supposed to do, lets it go. This doesn't mean learning is pointless. It doesn't mean you have a bad memory. And it definitely doesn't mean you're not capable of retaining information. It just means memory isn't automatic. It's earned. And the process of earning it doesn't feel like learning. It feels like struggling. You forget things you just learned not because you're forgetful, but because your brain is constantly deciding what's worth keeping. And unless you give it a reason to hold on, it won't. That's not failure. That's just how memory works. And knowing that doesn't fix it, but it does take the blame off you. Because this was never about effort. It was always about biology.